Hi, I'm Susan and welcome to Susan Stanley Stitch in Time. This is episode 54 and we are going to have a great episode today. I'm really excited about it. Typically on this channel I talk about cross stitch and quilting, sewing notions and methods from the past, and I'm starting to explore the material culture of what was going on during these earlier time periods when all this sewing and needlework was happening. So I hope you'll join me, and thank you if you've come back, and welcome if you're new. On today's episode, we're going to take a look at a sampling of samplers. I'm going to show you some samplers of all different types. I want to share with you some of the stitching that I've done. I have a new chapter in the story of Pharaby and Corliss, my two little girls from 1870 who live in Kentucky, and we're going to get a closer look at some of their sewing adventures, including what in the world is a half square triangle. I have a shop update and just some general good chit chat, so settle in and let's get started. So we've just finished the month of September, and in the cross stitch world there is Sampler September and September Sampler Soiree. And I did not get as much stitching done as I would have liked for this month, but I did think a lot about samplers, and not just cross stitch and needlework samplers, samplers of in all textile realms. And I've shown some of these examples before, and there's one really special kind of sampler that I want to show you today. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit about what makes something a sampler, or is it just an example? And so many samplers that we're going to take a peek at today are showing you a different type of element of that kind of needlework. Each section or block represents a different skill set or a different layout. I also noticed that in cross stitch and needlework there were samplers that really didn't break down into that category. They were more of an overall example of the work that the stitcher could do. And so I think that helped me a little bit in looking at this overall needlework in general. And it will make more sense when I show you the thing at the end that I've recently acquired that is just, I feel like, is such a treasure. So I started thinking about all the different types of needlework samplers, and of course I'm going to pop pictures in when I can reference one that I think is good. So of course we know that in sewing and stitching there were so many skills needed, and children learned at home or in class these skills to survive in everyday life. Textiles were precious, and you couldn't just go out to the store and buy a new one. Things needed to be mended and repaired and saved for a future use. There really isn't a clothing sampler collection that I could draw from, but that is definitely the case with clothing. Things were cut down and resized for a child. When they were worn out, things were repurposed. So in light of that, one of the really common samplers that I don't think gets enough attention is a darning sampler. And let me put a picture in right here. So a darning sampler is showing a set of skills and a set of needlework patterns that can be reproduced and used to mend or darn something that had been worn. Another type of sampler is a mending sampler, and I have shown this before, but let me put it in here again because it's just so sweet. This mending sampler is so sweet and definitely has seen some some better days, but this is a beautiful example of the work and the workmanship required to be a seamstress and to repair items. And it shows different examples of repairing circular holes, diamond-shaped holes, matching up stripes, matching up check, seaming the pieces together. So, a mending sampler. And so the mending sampler shows ways of repairing holes and damage, wear and tear to a garment. And this sampler was a way of showcasing the skills that a person had, either for employment or maybe just to show that they had arrived and could do the work needed to do. There are whitework samplers with beautiful needle lace that show just a variety of styles and skills. And if I have a picture, I'll put that in here. And then, of course, there are quilt samplers that show typically a different quilt block. In each block is a different pattern and has a different variety of skills involved. And so I have done several sampler quilts, but probably my all-time favorite and the one that you might be familiar with is the Dear Jane. And so let me put that in right here. I made a short video about it. One of the more notable examples of a sampler quilt is the Dear Jane quilt. It was stitched by a woman named Jane Stickle during the time of the Civil War, and it's really something that could be discussed at length in a presentation, and I'll likely do more of that in the future. But what strikes me about this quilt is the intricacy of the blocks, and there are over 200 blocks and each one is different. So it is a sampler in that it is a sampling of several different blocks, over 200 as a matter of fact, with over 5,000 pieces of fabric. And so when I reference a sampler quilt, this is what I am drawn to, is something that shows a different block, a different construction, a different set of piecing. And this is my rendition of it. If I was going to do it today, I might do it differently. So there are present-day examples of quilting samplers as well, and they're a great tool to showcase different skills, and they're also a great tool to help new stitchers learn those skills. Of course, one of my favorite samplers that I don't own is a fabric swatch book. And these were a sampling of all the different fabrics that a textile manufacturer produced. And it's just a little swatch of the fabric glued into a book with reference notes. There are beautiful examples online. Recently, a dear friend sent me a link to the one in Old Sturbridge Village. And so I'm just going to pop a few pictures in here. And this is showing a sampling or an example of each fabric that was being produced. If you're a knitter, there are knitting sample books that show you different knitting stitches to achieve a desired pattern. And of course there are embroidery stitches. And all of these are just, there's just a multitude of things available. The example I want to show you that I recently acquired that I think is so dear and so sweet, and what drove me to this topic today is a plain sewing sample book. And so let me get that for you, and so we can take a look at it. So we may not put a lot of stock and value in just the plain everyday sewing that went on, but it went on constantly because sewing was just a necessity for centuries, especially before the sewing machine came in. Hand sewing was just a necessary tool and skill that needed to be learned. And so I feel so privileged to have acquired this plain sewing sampler book. It's from 1893, and it is the work of Minnie Simmons. And this book was set up with the pages designed with lessons for the child to stitch and sew. And so the first lesson was to stitch a running stitch around the shape. And you can see on the right hand side is this example, and then the left hand side is the directions and of how that was to be achieved. This book would take someone through everything needed to learn how to do patchwork, sewing, for garment making, mending, all the things that we just talked about. And of course, what delights me about books like this is the teeny tiny examples, and you can see they've been attached to the page with little brads. And I just find it so charming. And so this was Minnie's showcase of what she had learned in her sewing adventures and her sewing life. I think it's just so precious. This is weaving. She needed to know how to weave to make blankets and coverlets, but also as a precursor to mending. I could probably do a short video, maybe that lasted about 20 minutes, to show you each page. This is the running stitch and a gather for a precursor to learning how to make sleeves. And all the teeny tiny examples attached to the book are just so delightful. Here is some stitching and some back stitching. And like I said, the directions are on one side, and then the example is attached on the left. And this book was predetermined. It was created so that a child could work through the lessons and gain the skills that they needed. Here's garment bias and true bias. So she's going to learn about bias in fabric. We've talked about that a little bit. And she's going to get into marking and cross stitch and all the things needed to keep linens organized in the home. This is how to fell a seam so that all of the stitches are hidden, so you wouldn't have any fraying on the internal. A felled seam is an important skill for even today. It's good to know how to do. I think it's interesting, the choice of fabric. This is a little tiny drawstring bag, so she's applying her stitches now, what she's learned, to create this little drawstring bag, and it's probably one of the first little objects that's actually practical and could be used that appears in the little book. She's learning how to attach eyelets, or making eyelet stitches, and actually, ooh, that page is missing. Maybe somebody took it out, or maybe she didn't do that lesson, I don't know. Anyway, lots of other delightful, she's learned how to do a teeny tiny herringbone stitch, and it's white on white, so you might not be able to see it. She's getting into decorative stitches and embroidery and cross stitch. She's embroidered on flannel. I just think this book is such a treasure, and what a wonderful way to showcase your work. And you know, had I started doing one of these when I was younger, it would have been a really neat thing to keep. So I wanted to share that different kind of a sampler with you today, and as we move through Sampler September and into October. So let me know if you can think of any other samplers that I could add to my list. Of course, there's sampler boxes of chocolates, but that's not exactly what we're talking about, although it sounds pretty good right now. And if you would like me to do a short video just flipping through the pages, I'd be happy to do that if I hear from enough of you. So let me know. Next, I'd like to move into the works in progress that I've done and some finishes. And as you know, I've been working towards a new doll quilt project for our little girl, Pharaby, who is our girl from Boyette, Kentucky in 1870. And I will be revealing more about that coming each episode now, coming up into November, and more details will be in the works. But Pharaby is, as a young child in 1870, would have been stitching a marking sampler, and so one of my whips is, of course, is an 1870 marking sampler. Now I've chosen to stitch a sampler from Hedgerow Stitching, and it's an 1871 sampler. It is Amy Florence Ogilvy. This is available on Hedgerow Stitching as a PDF download. And so I scooped that up, and I looked at it, I studied it, and I read what Rebecca had written about it. And so I went for a look and an effect that was most closely the closest approximation as I could reach for an 1870 child, and what she would have, the materials she would have used, and the fabric she would have chosen, the thread. And so I went with Fine de Aubusson wool, which I will show you right here, in 2 colors. There are actually 2 colors on that chart, and yeah, I made a little bit of progress. I've been busy kitting up things for the future and doing some other secret sewing, so my personal stitching wasn't a ton, but I did a little tiny bit on this. So got the bottom half done, and I do love what happens when you start to add this darker burgundy color. It starts to blend that little bit brighter orangey red. And it's funny because I wonder if she just really wanted her name to stick out or if she ran out of thread. But the whole sampler is stitched around with the brighter orange, so I don't know. Maybe it was intentional. Let me hold this up a little bit longer so you can take a look at it. I have commented before at how much I'm enjoying stitching on this 24 count rain barrel is the linen. It's delightful, and then adding the wool to that just gives it such a drapey, hefty, oh, it just feels so yummy in your hand. It's so fun. It's so fun to stitch. And of course that wool thread is, it's very forgiving. So I'm having a lot of fun with that. So Pharaby is, so Pharaby as a young child would have been stitching a marking sampler. Marking samplers were still being stitched by young children in 1870 pretty regularly. I mean, that was like a regular part of their education. So I have to stay up with her. All right, so I did also, I shared on Instagram that I had not done this yet, and I intended to, but when I released this little tiny needlework basket in the summer, in a summer garden needlework basket, I included as the tag, and I'm just gonna do this, and the needle book. The motifs on there are from one of my, from a hand-painted Berlin work chart that I own, and I'll be talking a lot more about this in the future. But it actually, the little needle book and tag are the same motif, and it's actually something you can stitch. These hand-painted charts were typically painted by women, and Berlin work was just known for its depth of color and shading. And so I always intended to stitch it and make it as a little gift for somebody, and I finally got around to doing that. So if you didn't see it on Instagram, let me show you. My little teeny tiny Berlin work flower motif. And I stitched it for a friend, and I put the date, and I debated about how to finish it. Am I going to make it into a lavender sachet, or I don't know, you know, needlebook is always something that we go to. I used my own 103 threads that I had in my collection, and I just, you know, I probably would have chosen, there's a couple that I might have chosen a little bit of a different shade, but oh, it was so fun. And then I went into my sewing room to lay it out and kind of ponder how to finish it, and this paperweight was sitting there that I had purchased probably 2 or 3 years ago. And the photo, normally these had a photo in them. They're I think they're from, I want to say the early 1900s, 1920s, 1930s. I don't think before that. And I placed that right on top of there, and it fit absolutely perfectly. I think I had seen Liz Matthews do this, or someone else on Instagram had shown this, and I thought that was so clever. So I don't know, maybe it'll be finished as a paperweight and with that underneath. So let me know what you think. Anyway, that was so fun. And so for those of you who have the little tiny needlework basket, there's an additional thing you can do with what's available there. And like I said, more will be coming regarding all that in the future. And then the next thing I worked on, because I don't know why I've just been so drawn to my First Stitches scrapbook, I had to start the story, or at least move on to the story. I had done the story of Corliss. I introduced her. Of course, the book started with Mary, if you remember that. Mary was my first girl that took us on this First Stitches journey, or started the First Stitches journey last year. Mary was from St. Louis. And I'm adding, you know, I'm adding elements of fabric, I'm adding ephemera, and I'm trying to include ephemera in all the kits that you get from me, so that you can do your own First Stitches book. Had I started this today, I probably would have left one page for my thoughts and feelings about stitching this proximate experience, a little bit about my own personal journey, and maybe had Mary or the young girls' information on the other side. But I'm going to have to, you know, leave that for another book. Anyway, so Corliss has been really busy. She was making her Hexie flowers, and this book is great. It's a mixed media art journal, and it can handle a lot of glue, and it can handle thick things like a hexagon paper backed flower. So let's see, where did we end up? Corliss had gone to the general store. She was getting all the toweling to make her dish towels. And these pictures I just took from my Instagram posts. This is the letter that she wrote to her father asking for a trousseau trunk. I need to fill in what, I would imagine that she would say. This is kind of her designing her trousseau quilt. A little bit more that I need to add. This is her working on her dish towels. And you can see I've got empty places to fill in. And then here we go. We start with Pharaby. And I'm just going to leave the opening page blank. And I'm just making the chapters flow in sequence. And Pharaby and Corliss's story will hop back and forth as we progress. And in Pharaby's life, dolls are very significant in Pharaby's life. And we're going to find out more about that. And then this is just all the wording, and here we go. Pharaby is going to start her first doll quilt, or her second doll quilt, or at least a little bit more of the patchwork. Her education was broken up because of the war. And so here's a little bit of Pharaby. And I've had people ask for ephemera collections, and I'm working on trying to put something together so you can create your own book, and there are resources available online to access some of the things that I've used, and some of them are not copyright free, so I cannot have them printed and packaged up for you. But I hope you'll join me in this. It's been, I have become completely consumed with these young girls, and I think some of you have as well. So anyway, thanks for letting me share that with you. So I worked on my First Stitches journal. All right, next thing I want to do is read the next chapter in First Stitches story. And as you know, I have been adding timestamps with chapters to all my videos. So if this is not something you want to hear, or if you're coming back and you want to just listen to this, you can skip over to the timestamp and find it easily. And if you want to listen to the story in sequence, you can go back to the Floss Tube, I think 47, where it started for this year, and just find the First Stitches story and have a listen. So let's hear about Corliss and Pharaby. All right, so if you've been wondering about my friend here, you're going to find out more about this little doll as we explore Pharaby and get the update on her and Corliss. And so just sit back and enjoy. You can stitch, and I'll read to you about the next step in their adventures. This is chapter 15. It's October 1870, and Pharaby begins her quilt. It was Monday, and the air was chilly, and Pharaby's face and fingers were turning red as she walked to school. She wished she could have stayed tucked into her feather bed with her favorite doll, Althea, for a little longer. But there were chickens to feed, and Mother needed help getting the breakfast ready. It was always exciting to see the other children in class, and Pharaby enjoyed her teacher and the lessons she presented to the group. Today was a special day. Each child would have extra time to work on a project of their choice. Pharaby was ready with 2. Saturday and Sunday had been busy at Pharaby's house as her mother and stepfather began preparing for harvest season. The hemp crop had done well, and her stepfather was now traveling to Louisville to sell his crop and the crops of several other farmers in the area. Pharaby had spent Saturday morning going through Mother's fabric scrap bag. She would be making a quilt for her doll Althea that included squares and half-square triangles. She had stitched square patches together before, but the triangles were something new. Mother told her she would be using templates this time, and so her triangles were sharp and crisp, and the points were not cut off. The scrap bag was full of all sorts of colors and prints. A quilt that complements Althea's dress might be nice, suggested Mother. Pharaby dug through the fabrics, sorting them by color. When she was done, there were stacks and stacks of various browns, several greens, and large pieces of red, and a few blues, pinks, and purples. Pharaby made her choices. With Mother's help, she began pressing the pieces of cloth. While they were still warm, she began cutting the squares using the templates Mother had set aside for her. The templates for the squares and triangles were different, and Pharaby concentrated to be sure she kept them straight. That afternoon at school, when it was time to work on a project of choice, Pharaby pulled out hers. Mother had helped her wrap the patches and her marking sampler. She had placed the items along with the tools she would need in a brown piece of paper and carefully wrapped them and tied them with a string. Pharaby was nervous about keeping the items together, and she knew Mother was trusting her to take care of the needle, thread, and scissors. "Those are beautiful stitches," said her teacher. Pharaby felt her face heat up as the class turned to look. "Thank you, ma'am," she replied. When it was time to clean up and go home for the day, Pharaby had trouble putting everything back in the paper wrapping. By the time she arrived home, her projects and tools were almost falling out of the package. Mother helped her sort through the crumpled pile as she put everything back where it belonged. "This will never do. It's time you had your own scrap bag," she exclaimed. Mother headed out to the barn. Pharaby watched and wondered what sort of scrap bag would be out there. Meanwhile, after a few days of travel, Corliss's father arrived in Louisville. He was anxious to sell the items in the back of his wagon, pick up supplies for the farm, and put a few letters in the post for friends, and head over to Aunt Edith's to have dinner and spend the night before returning to Boyette. Most of all, he was excited to see Corliss. Her letters were bright and cheerful, and he knew she was doing well. The money he had set aside from the harvest for her trousseau trunk was safely tucked in his jacket lapel pocket in an envelope. It was his plan to give it to her after the evening meal. When he arrived at Aunt Edith's house, he could smell the chicken and dumplings that were cooking on the stove. It was the late afternoon. From the sidewalk, he paused and looked up through the window and saw Corliss sitting in the drawing room window, seated, her head bent over her work. He was struck by how much older she looked as she sat there sewing. Corliss was very intently focused on getting the hexagon path stitched around her flowers so she could show her father when he arrived. A knock made her jump and squeal as she raced to open the front door. Her father barely had time to remove his hat as she threw herself into his arms. Aunt Edith, hearing the commotion from the kitchen, came to the parlor, and there were hugs and tears shared by all. After supper, Father presented Corliss with the money, admonishing her it was for her trousseau trunk. He said it was a good idea she would have a place to put her quilt project in when she was finished with it. Her eyes got wide and she was very excited. And best of all, he got another hug. She asked Aunt Edith when they could go get it. Could they go on Saturday? Aunt Edith laughed and said she reckoned they could go as Corliss had finished 2 towels and she clearly needed something to put them in after all. Earlier that day, Corliss had carefully smoothed out the piece of brown paper that Aunt Edith saved from the store on the kitchen table. She put a piece of the toweling in the center of the paper with some lengths of red thread and carefully tucked a letter inside. She folded it up just so and reused the special twine from the store to tie it. She gave the package to her father, telling him it was for Pharaby. The visit ended and everyone retired to bed. Father would be leaving early in the morning and to return to Boyette. Corliss was determined to have her quilt center completed before the next time. So, if you've been following along, you know that Corliss is busy working on her trousseau quilt, as many of you are, and Pharaby and she's also been working on dish towels, which I'll talk about again. And Pharaby is getting ready to learn how to do half square triangles and her next doll quilt. And I hope you're enjoying this series, and I find it really fun, a fun way to help you learn some of these same skills. And I know I've heard from so many of you, and you're enjoying it, and it just delights me and makes me so happy. So we'll talk more about dolls. We'll talk more about this doll. We have so many more things to learn and discover about these two young girls in Kentucky in 1870, and just kind of get a feeling for what it would have been like back then. So next I'd like to share a little bit of a shop update and then fill you in on what I'm going to give you next time. So for those of you who are looking forward to experiencing another doll quilt and learning some new skills, and whether you want to stitch the next doll quilt using proximate methods from the 1870s, which are a tiny bit different than 1840, or if you want to use some other methods that I'll be sharing with you that are older but maybe with a little bit of contemporary twist. You'll be learning the next step I feel that is important for someone starting their quilting journey, and that is to learn how to make a half square triangle. And you've heard me mention it several times, and so let me just show you what a half square triangle is, because it's a kind of an odd name. And basically it is a square that is cut on the diagonal and comprised of two different fabrics. And so in a lot of stitching patterns today, you'll see HST, or maybe they'll write the whole thing out, half square triangle, and this is what they're referring to, this shape. And it is a foundational building block to putting together so many blocks in quilts. And if you look back at the Dear Jane, you'll see many of the samples of blocks, or many examples of blocks, have half square triangles. Now, not all of them do, but it's just a really good next step to learn. So you're going to learn along with Pharaby if you'd like, and make a half square triangle. So I wanted to make sure you knew about that. Now, you know Corliss, I want to tell you a little bit about what I have available in my shop. And I have one new item that I'm just so excited about. And it is something that I worked with LaDonna of Sampling of Memories. I worked with her to be able to bring this to you. I wanted a way to commemorate or kind of hold on to these little girls and their stories. She does the most beautiful scissor fob, project bag, thread bling work that I've seen, and she makes these cabochons. And so I gave her the pictures of the little girls, and she put them into a double-sided cabochon. So this is a little bit more elaborate than a single-sided. There are no other embellishments because these kind of speak for themselves. And then on the back it says first stitches. Now, honestly, these are lovely enough that you could remove the ring, the jump ring, and wear them as a necklace. I actually considered of making a charm bracelet, but I think that would probably get too heavy because I do plan to have more girls in my world. Anyway, so we have Corliss, we have Pharaby, and of course we have little Mary, who is our first, who started this whole journey. I'll insert a picture here. I'm not sure how these are showing up. They're awfully tiny. They really, when I opened them, I was delighted. They turned out better than I could have imagined, but they reminded me so much of a locket. And even though they don't have a hinged opening, they look like a little locket picture of these girls. So if you've fallen in love with any of these girls, or if you have stitched one of their projects and want a way to remember them or commemorate them, I hope you'll take advantage of this. And I just really truly thank LaDonna of Sampling of Memories. Her work is beautiful, and these couldn't have turned out nicer. So I'm delighted to be able to offer them to you. There are other things that I had in my shop that have sold out, and I hope to restock, but I did have some beautiful thread winders from Jackie Duplessis. I've had some beautiful Golden Forge scissors. I'm trying to stock things as I can and make them available to you and let you know through newsletter and Instagram and Floss Tube. So the next thing that I have that I'm super excited about, that I know I hope grows over time, and that is I've added to my thread collections, and I've added this year a variety of greens. And so if you are building your collection of threads for 103 or Swasserfine, I think this is a great way to get a nice scope and a nice, just have a nice library of options when you go to do either cross stitch, applique, hand piecing, whatever form you choose to use this with. Now, I have mentioned before, but I have on my website a free downloadable 2-page information sheet that tells you how I use these threads and why I love these threads so much. I do have some fall colors. I do have a red collection that typically sells out pretty fast, and I've tried to restock it. But it gives you kind of a rundown of, if you're appliquing, which thread to use and for what purpose. If you're hand piecing, which thread to use and for what purpose. If you're doing cross stitch, what count linen I like or I feel works best with these threads. So yeah, I hope to offer a different color palette every year, maybe more often if possible. But this year is green, and you know, you can never have too much green. You have to think of green as a neutral background in some ways, because in applique, typically full of leaves, stems, you're going to use a ton of green thread. Cross stitch, there's always grass and trees and things with green. There's vines, there's leaves. Green it's an essential. So I hope you'll take advantage of that and enjoy it. And then finally, I have a few of Corliss's dish towel kits left, and I will restock more. This is my Corliss towel. This is what you end up making, and there is a downloadable, you get a downloadable pattern with photos and all sorts of directions to walk you through. And so you will get this in a bag that's wrapped with string, and when you pull it out, you will have the waist linen, and it's not water soluble, so you don't have to worry about that. You'll have a piece of ephemera, a 1870s kitchen. You will have your cross stitch chart for your monogram of choice, and then you will have a thread or a floss drop with Corliss on it, 2 different linen threads that you need for the project, some binding clips, and the 2 needles that you need. So everything is there. This is, if you have a young person who is interested in stitching, this is a great way for them to start. Or if you want to make some really pretty gifts for people, I think this is a great option as well. So, all right. And then finally, I want to tell you about an event that I hope you will all take advantage of. You know, I like the global story of stitching in the 19th century. I like to touch and look at all aspects of sewing during that time. And earlier in the year, I talked about this exhibit at the DAR, Sewn in America. And I, unfortunately, am not going to be able to attend, but they are having a 2-day conference November 1st and 2nd at the DAR. But if you want to be a part of it and you can't attend, you can watch it virtually. They are offering a Zoom option for this event. And if you remember, we talked about it. This event talks about samplers, it talks about clothing construction, it talks about quilting, it talks about the making and all that was going on in early America to keep textiles in every home. And the Zoom event option is such an excellent option. I think for an event like that, it's affordable. If you went to the event and paid for transportation and hotel and food and the event itself, you would be spending an awful lot more money than the cost of the event. I believe it's $75 for 2 days of lectures and up close and personal looks at what is presented here. And I've listened to Alden, the curator, do several lectures now, and every time I hear her, I hear more. So I hope, I'm going to encourage you to sign up. Now, having said that, it is hard to find the link to the Zoom option. It's a little bit tricky. I'm going to put the link on Eventbrite that you need to go to sign up. And then when you get to Eventbrite, you're going to click on register, and it makes you feel like you're registering to attend in person. But when you scroll all the way down at the end, you can either register in person or keep going down and register for the Zoom option. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. I think it's going to be fantastic. Her, if you've watched her speak, Alden speak about the exhibit, she has the clothing articles turned inside out so you can actually see the construction. I'm really looking forward to the speakers talking more in depth about each item. So I hope you'll join me. I'll be there. I'll be watching on Zoom. Okay, so until next time, I hope that if you are participating in any of the projects that you will share on Instagram using the hashtag #first_stitches. I would love to see your progress. I know other people would as well. I got a sneak peek of 2 people who are working on this. One of them bought the kit, one of them was using her stash. They're both looking fantastic. I can't wait to see what these become and how everybody progresses. And stick with me, there's more fun things coming, and Pharaby is busy doing her stitching, Corliss is as well, and I have been kidding like crazy, so I have a lot for you. Until next time, please make time for stitching. All right, bye-bye friends.